Welcome back to Albus Explains. I'm Albus, and today we shall begin something new I'm naming Let's Talk. And the topic for today is sacrifices. So let me just get right into it. There is a ritual in Hinduism where after a puja of any kind is done, a coconut is smashed and broken with a single blow to the ground, and the liquid is sprinkled over everyone present. This is a very auspicious thing to do, and if the coconut is broken in a single blow, it is applauded, as it is frankly a difficult thing to get right. Anyway, I sat to wonder what the purpose behind it was. Soon I realized very few people had questioned it. My family and friends just didn't know, and they made up their answers. When I pushed them further, this line of inquiry led me to answers like, "It has always been this way for generations," or "because it is a very Shubh thing to do," without explaining why it was Shubh. Shubh means auspicious in Sanskrit. Well, getting no proper closure on this, the thought left my brain just as suddenly as it had entered. Many years later, recently, I was browsing the images from Himachal Pradesh, that is a state in India, for my study. A memory of a time when I had visited there many years ago popped into my head. I was in my 10th grade and on a school trip, and we visited the Hidimba temple as a part of our trip to the northern states. It had been a long day and we were tired of being paraded from one corner of the state to another. Calling the bus in which we travelled comfortable was like calling the ice hot. Finally, we reached the temple and a small trek was to be done. Everyone was tired. The sun had already disappeared and the sky was turning grimmer. We carried our tired selves up to the temple only to find it very poorly lit. It had a small courtyard around it and many people were there besides our class. It was surprisingly not noisy, unlike every other place we had visited on our trip. The entire place had an air of quiet and solemnity. No one spoke loudly, no one was laughing or cracking jokes. There were close to 200 people there, but it felt closer to 20. The air there was cold, as it always was in Himachal Pradesh, but it was heavy, and I was not the only one feeling it. After eyeballing around, we saw the temple, and it was shrouded in darkness with a feeble tube light illuminating the entryway. It made the entire temple look as if it popped out of a wormhole, not being part of this reality. But that is just me. Anyway, I call it entryway and not a gate because it was less of a door and more of a square hole in the side of the wall, raised from the floor, but low enough to make everyone crawl in and out for entry. It was not uncomfortable for us younglings, just out of ordinary. I personally had never seen a temple like this before. But the most astonishing aspect of the temple was not the entryway, but that just under its extended roofs on all sides of the temple, there were scores of animal skulls, ranging from gigantic yak skulls to buffalo skulls to goats and even chicken skulls, lined inside of the roof. Once I saw it, it caught hold of me as if in a snare. It was enough to scare the 14-year-olds, including yours truly. It had a numinous feeling around it. I could not look directly at them, but neither could I snatch my gaze away from it. Standing in the line, about to enter the temple, I was still scanning the skulls, secretly hoping and dreading at the same time to find a human skull there. I entered the temple through the entryway, squished my way inside, and inside it was surprisingly roomy. My gaze flew upwards to find the roof of the temple, and I saw a hook at the top with a long rope on the ceiling. It perturbed me, but I didn't think of it much. The line of my fellow classmates was very eager to get out of the temple, and so within hardly a few minutes I was again on the outside, with the empty eye sockets of the skulls gazing back at me. I returned from my memory trip just in time to find an old picture of the Hidimba temple from the 1860s in the pictures that I was browsing. I returned from my memory trip just in time to find an old picture of the Hidimba temple from the 1860s in the pictures that I was browsing. The image was in sepia tone. A big white bull stood at the entrance of the temple, exactly where I had stood so many years ago, and scores of people stood around it, all the way up to the cliff where it is situated. The place was cleared of trees and it was daytime, and a sort of fair was arranged there, with Ferris wheels and everything. I learnt more about the surroundings of that temple from that old picture than from the actual visit to that place. When I was there was no light around, and it looked just dark in all directions except the lighted path from where we had come. Here I got a better picture, literally, of how that place was. In the caption of that image it was written, "Sacrifice of a bull to Ma Hidimba," and then there was a postscript which explained that humans were once sacrificed here and strung up inside the temple for visitors to move them against the rock as a ritual. Since those times, the size of the animals got smaller than plants, and in time they sacrificed pumpkins, then eventually coconuts. In the far eastern part of India, the Shaktism or Shakt Parampara is very strongly followed. In fact, the highest or strongest of the Shakti Peeth of Ma Sati is in Assam, in the temple of Kamakhya Devi Mandir. As the story goes, different parts of her body were scattered all over India, and the yoni of Ma Sati fell in that place. And the sat of that place is so strong that the yoni bleeds during its monthly menstrual cycles. And during those days, the temple is kept closed. Also, this sat has enlightened the people there, who are far more comfortable to talk on these subjects which are considered rather sensitive in other parts of the country. It is less of desensitizing the people to the disgust of it, but rather acknowledgement that this facet of life is just as natural and inevitable as any other. And personally, I believe ignoring or shunning it is mere running headfirst into brick walls. In this temple, weekly and monthly sacrifices of goats and other animals is done. The technical word for it is bali. It is the case for so many of temples in India which have a history of bali going back centuries or even longer. The blood and gore is not the aspect which is in focus, rather the entire focus is serving Ma a sacrifice. The concept is a sacrifice given to Ma will better the future. It is more of a transactional ritual than something that you have to take at face value. It is not just dedicated to Makali, even though she is the main deity to whom sacrifices are made to, nor Ma Hidimba, who is more of a Gram Devi of Himachal Pradesh for more than 1,000 years. The temple itself is around 5 centuries old. It is the basic tenet of praying to any goddess which necessitates a sacrifice. Even in Jain influenced Gujarat and Rajasthan, where animal life is even more valued, the temples regularly see sacrifices by Rajputs who still have Kshatriya blood in them. Here, goats are sacrificed on Dashera after Navratri. The concept of sacrifice is also prevalent at village levels here. There are legends that whenever a drought or a famine comes, or the baudi, that is the well, of the village is rendered empty, a young couple walks into it and the problem is solved. This is something tribal and primitive in this, but the couple itself doesn't feel forced, nor are they actually forced. In fact, if a forced couple is sacrificed, then the transaction usually backfires. And rather curiously, all villages in India are attuned to this fact, and so a great care is taken when this is done, and mostly as a last resort too. But whenever this is done, the people do it willingly. Now, if I say that human sacrifice has always been a prevalent ritual in the Indian subcontinent, I would be wrong. Ahimsa is a virtue long held very highly by thinkers ancient, contemporary, and everyone in between. But a sacrifice is still a very real phenomena. But we can safely eliminate human sacrifices or purushamedh from being literal, but not for animal sacrifices, at least being very rare. I was trying to get the mindset of a person who can take the life of a sentient animal, much less a human, as a ritual, not out of human frailties like anger or revenge, but as a prayer. The psychology of a sacrifice is very visceral. It feels very real and consequential and is probably necessary for the society, is what I concurred. Ranging from mere delayed satisfactions all the way to human sacrifices, Balidan is a very core part of the psyche of the people. One of the many reasons that the people of this subcontinent have a saving mindset rather than a spending mindset is Bali. Sacrifice of the present for a better future is ingrained in the culture. A student wasting his youth in studies for a better future for himself and his family is not so different than any other type of sacrifice, a sacrifice of self. For that to happen though, a deal must be made with the future, which is imagined in the form of Makali, but it could be anything. Let me explain what I mean by that. I suggest you look at an image of Makali. You will realize quickly that you have never actually seen it, only caught glimpses of it, just like I had done for those skulls. The roop of Makali is ferocious. She is unapologetically wild. She embodies the crueler aspects of nature, like being surrounded by a ring of fire. Fire is another numinous thing, just like a skull is. It is not very pleasant to look at, but our gaze ends up there anyway, as it is the source of light and warmth and is constantly moving, that is embodied in her. She wears a garland of skulls or heads, which means that she is not unaware of death. She causes death. She is death. She is washed by blood of her enemies, which is peculiar because the red color in clothes is usually very pleasing to look at. But the direct image of blood reminds us of our own mortality, to which women are acutely made aware of every month, and so they handle it much more efficiently, I believe. She is without clothes, which symbolizes the wildness of nature itself. The only clothes she has are covers made from limbs of evil enemies who stood no chance in front of her. She holds every weapon imaginable in multiple arms, symbolizing the different ways that you can die while looking like a deadly spider. She symbolizes everything bad that nature can do to you. And what is the solution to that? Sacrifices. You make sacrifices to her and keep on doing that, and if you are lucky, she accepts your sacrifice. And then you get to see the benevolent side of nature in Madurga. She is smiling rather than having the angry face of Kali. She is beautiful, just like nature is beautiful. She cares for you, gives you nutrition, just like nature. She gives birth to things, just like nature does. She embodies the good side of the feminine. The Kali-Durga duality aspect of every feminine is placated by sacrifice. And it is not limited to Ma Shakti, but also extends to Ma Lakshmi, who comes with her own negative side called Alakshmi. She brings poverty and misery wherever she goes, as a stark contrast to Ma Lakshmi. In fact, it would surprise you to learn that the lemon and chili hanging done on doors and vehicles of Hindu homes is a prayer to Ma Alakshmi done unknowingly. This does not mean that there is a hierarchy in divinity for these feminine forms. In fact, this is embracing of all aspects of human life. Nature can be cruel and unyielding, but if you give enough sacrifices, nature can provide you with things no one else can. This means that both the sides of nature must be prayed to, or in other words, be reminded of. Because if we forget about the horrible side of nature, we forget the way to come out of its talons. If we forget to sacrifice, then Ma Durga will not incarnate and nature will devour us. Very close to the sunk cost fallacy, sacrifices once made also embolden the faith of a person. Once you have sacrificed for something or someone, it may be anything, you will have put effort and time or basically value into that thing, thus increasing its value for you. This is another reason that religions that have sacrifices in them sustain longer due to the faith of the person who protects it. They have sacrificed so much for it that they will fight more fiercely to protect it, while those who don't won't. And it is not limited to religions only. Any aspect of your life that you have sacrificed for will automatically become of higher value. A student who has sacrificed his playtime will study harder and hence get better grade. Now you may argue that there was no direct causation, but there was, just not an obvious one. To sum everything up, that ritual I spoke of in the beginning is a representation of animal sacrifice at the most rudimentary level. The coconut water sprinkled on everyone there represents exactly what you think it represents. And this jarring shift in my worldview was aided by Ma Hidimba. I don't intend to bring back animal sacrifices into the mainstream, if there is such a thing. I wanted to showcase a different side, a rather hidden side of the world. I used to be a vocal opponent of the mass sacrifices done during the Gadimai festival in Nepal, but I am not so loud anymore. It still icks me to see a creature die, but now when the people who have been following that festival, that ritual for millennia are told not to do so, and that too by the state, it too feels wrong. Would I be able to do an animal sacrifice? Probably yes, but would I do it? Probably no. I do sacrifices all the time without realizing its psychology. Sometimes my sacrifices work, sometimes they go nowhere. All depends on what you are ready to sacrifice for a better future. Thank you.